Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's a privilege and pleasure to welcome you to our 91st Nonprofit Empowerment Webinar Series. And for the first, let me introduce our producer, Michael Largent. Can you explain, if our audience wants to share questions or comments, how they can do that?
Sure. So if you guys are listening, you have any questions, you can go ahead and type it either into the chat space, or there's also a little, I believe there's a little Q&A section that you can type it into, or what we really prefer is that you can just go ahead and unmute your mic and then ask the question that way when we come to a break. So those are your two options.
Thank you, Michael. And by the way, I have a lot of questions in line for our special guests, and I do mean special, but this show is for our audience of volunteer and professional nonprofit leaders. And if you have a question, we'll break through your question, okay? You're what this show is about. I really don't know how to introduce our subject matter expert. I was telling him that if there was a fundraising Hall of Fame, I think he would be a charter inductee. He's going to have to excuse me. I'm not going to go through his resume, because I put it this way, I don't think there's anything he hasn't done. And I asked him, this is my 91st webinar. He's been working with Donor Search, and I'm proud to say we're going to collaborate on a webinar on Thursday, January 12th. He's done 600. And I asked him, if you combine the webinars with live talk, how many presentations have you given? And it's well over 1,000. So let me first welcome truly, one of the big bats in the world of fundraising. We ever been called a bat before? Jay Cross in suburban Washington, D.C. You've been called a lot of things. You ever been called a bat?
No, but where my mind went, instead of the baseball, I was thinking about Dracula. So,
well, let's just say, J2, I want to thank you for the leadership and the mentorship you provided so many of us in the fundraising field. We've heard you live, we've heard you digitally, and we always come away the better for it. So thank you so much. The topic today is planning for a robust 2023. As I said, I have a half a zillion questions lined up for them. But at any time, the audience of nonprofit leaders, if you have a question, or maybe you want some clarification on one of Jay's comments, we'll respond to you in the chat box. Okay, Jay, I'm going to start off a real tough one, okay?
Fire away.
There are a lot of fundraising firms out there. What makes Frost on Fundraising different?
Well, I guess because it's not a firm, it's an idea.
So explain what's the idea?
Well, really, I'm more of an evangelist for fundraising than I am. I mean, I'm also a practitioner, but more than anything, I'm an evangelist for it. So I'm a true believer, and it's an article of faith for me that what we do is in the public interest. It's really for the good of things, and that's why it's fun. That if we go out there and we do what we do, whether it's doing what you're doing right now, or what I try to do, speaking about it, whether it's training or getting trained, both of those things are important, and the teachers are always also the instructed, whether it's practicing the art, whether it's giving, whatever it is, that those are all ways for us to invest ourselves in making a better world. And I know that that's a big, squishy thing to talk about, but I truly believe it. And when we start just making it all about the money, we lose entirely the thread of what this is about. So I'm first and foremost an evangelist for this, because I believe that if we can get people to be enthusiastic about it, which Jerry Panos used to say comes from the Greek, right? Which is to have God within you, then we can definitely be great advocates for it. And by the way, that's irrespective of any particular faith a person has.
Right.
It's really about finding that God within you in order to share that with others.
I love that. And by the way, I agree. How about a fist bump to begin the show?
How do you do that?
Okay. I like to ask this of just about all the fundraising experts I have, including yourself. My next question is, and then we're going to get to kind of the more essential building blocks of planning for 2023.
Sure.
But my next question is, why is it that so many business and community leaders, and a lot of them serve on our nonprofit boards, they are virtually fearless in everything else they have to face in life, except asking someone they know for a gift for one of their favorite nonprofits? What is this fear about?
Maybe because they think they're asking people for things or trying to extract things from people or get them to do things they don't want to do. And I don't believe that's effective either. I mean, I would be terrified to knock door on door like a lot of high school kids do in our neighborhood in order to get money for people to send a band somewhere or to sell candy bars for the field trip. That's pretty terrifying. You're going to a door. You have no idea if those people are interested in the same things you are. You're just trying to get something from them in order to do something. I have nothing against any of that. All of that is great, and more power to all the kids who are doing it. And I hope they learn a lot from that. And I've had to make calls, like probably a lot of us in fundraising have, to people before, kind of the equivalent of cold calls. I've done that in sales many years ago. Wasn't great at that. But all of those things feel extractive. And so they are terrifying. What I love about fundraising, for the type that I'm sure that you and I both practice and we try to instill in others, is that it's not about asking people for stuff. It's about inviting people to participate in things that matter to them and matter to us. And so if we get to know people a little bit, if we make it about them, not about us, and we make it about their needs, not our needs, then hopefully we're having a conversation with them about something meaningful. And so if we then say, wow, you told me that this really matters to you, and you told me the other kinds of things you do, and here's this project, and it matters to you, can we invite you to join me in supporting that? That feels great. And if we can get people to that place, then perfect. And I know that that's an easy thing to say, and it's hard to do, but I think it makes the process of asking for money easier, because then it's not about, what are they going to say? And are they going to tell me no? And am I going to be embarrassed? Well, none of these things happen if we make it about the other person, not ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. If we talk about three parts to the philanthropic circle, there is the donor, there's the solicitor, and there's the beneficiary. Mm-hmm. And you and I have been there more times than we can count. I honestly believe the donor gets the most out of the philanthropic loop.
Yeah, I agree completely. And not that it's a competition, but yeah, if we're doing things right, it should be that way. And I think that is unnecessarily controversial, because it's not like we're ceding power or responsibility or authority or anything. All we're talking about is, if we want to, I'm going to be doing an interview with somebody I haven't talked to for a long time tomorrow, who runs a food bank, Northern Illinois, Julie Yurko. And the thing is, when she does whatever she does every day, I'm interested to hear how it feels to her, because she knows that when she goes and meets with a donor, and if that donor has a heart for feeding people, that at the end of the day, some kid's going to have food in their stomach. Mm. I mean, so yeah, to your point, the donor is going to feel pretty amazing for having fed some child. But then even beyond that, man, it must feel great to be the donor, or for that matter, to be that person working in the service, part of it, of actually putting that food into a family's hands. All of those things feel pretty great. And if we weren't in the middle of it, it just wouldn't happen. I mean, the reality of this is, people don't just do things. They only do them because we invite them to do them. The fundraising is essential to this.
Jay, before we go to our topic, and I promise we will go to your topic, there's one other question I want to get your insights on.
Yeah.
You and I were taught, and we taught that nature gift fundraising had to be done one-on-one, face-to-face.
Yeah.
That was one of the golden rules for as long as we can remember. And then COVID came along with social distancing, and all of a sudden, virtual fundraising via video conferencing. Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to remain when we wonderfully get to the day we're not so worried about COVID and social distancing, what do you think is going to remain from the virtual fundraising experience?
Yeah, this is interesting because I think this will remain. And you and I probably were both doing a form of this before COVID. And so we knew it worked already. We've just seen now a lot of people have been able to pilot it and try it and find it successful. It's good for donors. It reduces barriers, right? There's no more geographic barrier. Sometimes it's easier to reach people that we thought before that we'd have to go through 3 levels of assistance and all that stuff. But now it's easier, and it's also more economic for organizations. So all those things are great. I think this will remain, but some of the things that I wonder if they should remain are also digital. So I've been a huge advocate for and promoter of social media for a long time. I have a heavy investment in it. I've tried to share what I know of that. I've used it extensively, and I have to admit that I am becoming quite sour on many aspects of it now. And I'm very concerned about the way organizations have always used it. And now I'm concerned that we're using some of those platforms at all, because I think that we are unintentionally, unwittingly finding ourselves in places we do not want to be, that do not represent our organizations or our missions well, in a desire to be able to talk with more people. So our desire is pure. Our practice is not always great, but it's, that's a learning process. The problem is we went into a field that was pure and pristine, lovely flowers, and Bambi was running around. We closed our eyes, woke up one morning and found out they've been pouring sludge from who knows what kind of toxic factory into the middle of it, but we're still there partying like it's 1999. Well, it ain't. And so I wonder if maybe one of the things that we need to think about is how do we continue talking to many in a way that's personal, which was still our challenge, but not doing it in places where people are doing things that are truly harmful to one another. And so that's kind of my question back for people is what's next? This is good.
On social media, we followed, you took a trip across the big pond.
Yeah.
Could you take a moment to compare and contrast philanthropy in Europe to here in the United States?
Yeah, sure. I've been working on that stuff actually for a long time before I went on that big 60th birthday thing. And the difference is, I was talking with somebody about this just earlier this week in the other series that I do with someone from Prospecting for Gold, Carrie Rock, who's the executive director there, the chief executive there. And there's a lot of similarities in terms of both giving and receiving or asking, but there are some significant differences. And I would attribute many of those personally not to cultural differences in giving, because giving is universal. If you go to Japan, which is the country that I know in some respects best outside the United States, you can go to Miyajima, which is this temple. Most of us have seen it. There's a large arch in the water, and then this beautiful temple. It's been there for hundreds of years. And if you walk around the temple, you can see these lanterns and other things hanging where there are names painted on them for donors. And so that's been going on for hundreds of years, longer than we've had a language as we are speaking it today. They were giving in Japan. But what they were not doing, and what they are not doing right now in England in the same way that we are here, everything's a little bit in a different schedule. I will not say behind, because that assumes that one is better than another. But what they are in a different schedule is the professionalization of fundraising. So again, in Japan, if you try to go to a university and a fundraising shop, there are very few that in any way resemble that in the United States. And that's also true for Canada and for the UK. It's almost like their starting point in terms of developing a fundraising operation is maybe 10 years ago, something like that. And the mechanisms for giving, such as the tax treatment of certain kinds of gifts, is also much more recent. That said, the ability to go and invite people to participate in things, That's been going on for longer than we've had a country. I think it's good for us to be a little humble about that, because we are really good at what we do in terms of inviting people to give to stuff. But we assume that means that we're somehow more generous. We're not.
Good point. We have about a month to go, and December is typically, that's a huge month for fundraising. I think I've read that about 1/3 of annual giving happens in December,
or
most
more
of it the last 3 days.
Right.
So, but what are your recommendations to nonprofits who are listening on how they should evaluate their fundraising program in addition to the obvious total dollars raised?
Wow. Yeah, that's hard. I wonder if, and I don't think anybody can do this very well. Not many people can do this well right now, but I love metrics. I love numbers. So, and not that I'm good at them, but I'd like to see them. So it's helpful to do things in basic math and then be able to share that with others. So maybe one of the things we can do is figure out what's a meaningful visit. I know this is kind of an old metric, but how many of those have we had this year? And this might be this is a meaningful exchange. Yeah. So I don't mean just, it doesn't have to be face to face, but it has to be meaningful conversation. It can't be, I tried to call somebody and I didn't reach them, or they were invited to an event and I was in the room, but across the, the table.
That's my favorite, by the way.
Yeah, we went to the same thing at the same time. But I do think that it's helpful to measure that. And I wonder, as we think about that, if we need to start, and we may talk about this later, start thinking in a couple of tracks. And one is, how can we be more efficient and meaningful in our communications on the major donor front? More like the David Lively school of major gift fundraising. Smaller portfolios, much more focused, deeper relationship building, much bigger gifts, because we need those.
Yeah.
But at the same time, find a way to be more meaningful in our exchanges and engagement with everybody else, because we are dramatically losing the middle donor. And that's a huge problem for us, especially if we do see a fall off in the big donors next year.
I think we've seen the Giving USA, I forget how long ago, had 2/3 of American households making some type of charitable contribution.
Yes.
And that's now, I think it's shy of 50%.
Yes, that's right. It's like 49.6%. And if I remember right, and it's a problem, because just because our aggregate numbers are high, doesn't mean that we are doing what we need to do with all these other people. I always think about this stuff in simple ways with restaurant analogies and family analogies. It's just easier for me. And when I think about this, I think about like a family in a wedding. So there are some people that you invite because, like your parents or somebody really close to you, and you're not doing it because they can give you the biggest gifts, although they probably will. You do it because those relationships are so meaningful to you. But then there are all the other cousins and folks. And the question is, do we invite those to the party? Or are we trying to save a few bucks because we don't want to serve one more piece of chicken? That's a really bad way of thinking about all the people who love the same things we do. They may not be able to go to the golf event. A lot of us don't even like golf. But they may be interested in hearing about the golfing event. There's a guy, Brian Lacey, who I think you know, who I work with a lot, and on capital campaign fundraising stuff. And Brian, I think, is the one who shared this with me about how with events for alumni bodies, that
Are you talking about Brian Saber?
No, Brian Lacey. This is
I'm sorry.
Brian Lacey, and he will talk about how if you have an event, the old way of doing this was you invite everybody to the event and you spend all your money there, and then afterwards you're pretty much done, which is poor on two fronts, but especially on stewardship, right? Instead of sending out an invite, and then whoever doesn't go, you still send a communication afterwards to show what a great party it was, not to make people feel bad, but to include them in the conversation about what happened, because they're just as important to you if they didn't go as if they did. So even if only 12 people go to the party, you want them to know that they were a part of it. Just like if it's a family wedding, you don't only send a thank you note to these few people who gave you some big silver bowl. You want to let everybody know what a great wedding it was and how much you love them. I think we need to think more that way. And if we can do that, maybe we can stem the tide of some of this loss that we're experiencing in terms of philanthropy in the United States.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, what are your recommendations to our nonprofit leaders on setting stretch but realistic goals for 2023?
Well, I hope that they'll focus on vision as opposed to just the mechanics. And what I mean by that is that I think people are attracted to invest in what results. You know, we talk about that a lot in terms of impact, but I think it's actually something bigger than impact. I think it's about ideas. So if whatever is driving Mackenzie Scott, and I won't pretend to know because I have not spoken with her, I have not met her. I probably never will. But if she's listening, it'd be
and
great
by the
to
way,
hear
if
her.
she is listening, you can cut in anytime you want. Jay and I will give you the floor.
That's right. And she can let us know how wrong we are. Because I would imagine that whatever is driving her is a desire to do something meaningful, or else she wouldn't be doing these things. And that means that it's not just, okay, we served 25 people last year, we want to serve 27 people this year. Or here's our program, what we'd like to do is build another wing. Or here are the ways we can increase the efficiency of this or decrease the cost of that. All those things are important. But those, as this is another Jerry Panis thing, I think, or maybe I've heard it from others, that...
By the way, you worked for Jerry, right?
Yeah, and I worked with Jerry for a bit, yes, the late Jerry Panis. But I think one of the things that he would say, and I've heard others say, is that statistics tell and stories sell, but the fundamental of a story is a character and a journey, and you're a part of it, you know. And then all the marketers would talk about the hero's journey and all this stuff. I'm talking about something more fundamental, which is that, you know, you want to be with, to use Lord of the Rings as an example, you want to be with those guys when they get to the top of the mountain and drop the ring in there. All the stuff that all along the way is exciting. You're a part of that and so forth. But it's really about the end goal, the end, having the end in mind that drives everybody to do something meaningful. So to finally answer your question, I think that what is great is if we talk with people about the end goal, rather than being fearful about overselling it. And I know we don't want to oversell. We don't want to promise something we can't deliver. I get that. But the big charities, the ones that have been successful in attracting lots of money for something like cystic fibrosis or something like that, they have to tell people we want to eliminate this. Now, maybe we can't do it tomorrow. It's the Humphrey Bogartism. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon or for the rest of your life. This is what we're going to do. We're going to try to aim at the big things, because if we're only here for a few years before we roll off the mortal coil. So if we aren't talking about that, why are we talking at all? Especially with people who have limited time and lots of resources. They want to be able to apply those to things that matter. So let's talk about vision.
We have a lot of CEOs and executive directors in our audience. What do you recommend they think about in setting evaluation criteria for their professional development officers?
Wow, that's so individualized. I'd be really reluctant to provide a guide to that. But I hope that there are significant metrics on engagement as well as dollars involved, and that if it's major gifts, that the focus is on fewer, better relationships that lead to more meaningful results, and for everybody else, that there's actual engagement, not just digital. Because as much as we all know that digital works, it only works if it's seen as authentic. And the problem with a lot of these platforms now is that I think we've all lost trust. And that's a problem, because our currency in our field is trust. Don't you think? I mean, it's... So we can't, I don't think we can use people I don't think we ever should have used people as ATMs, and we certainly can't now. So in other words, if do we do more solicitations? In other words, at the end of the year, do we say the annual giving team or the sustaining giving people should send out 12 instead of 10? Yeah, probably. But I guess the question I want to ask is, what were those communications? Were they about what the people wanted? Do we have a vehicle for gaining information that's meaningful to the engagement with them, not just trying to figure out how to get more money? Because I think money follows what we do. I don't think it drives any of this, but the numbers should help us. So we should analyze things. I will say one thing, which is that if somebody is building some of these analytics, it's probably not a bad thing to see what other people are doing. And one of the best resources that I think is the people at Next After. So Next After is a company that you know, Jim, which has test after test after test about what works. And so I would say, sure, as a part of that part of our brain, as we're thinking about how to build these metrics for our development teams, one of the things we ought to do is see, well, what have other organizations similar to ours done in terms of frequency and types and, decision strings, like what kind of gifts to ask for, what kind of follow-up to do, how much should be live, how much should be virtual, how much should be in person. I think that these things are important to building your metrics. And but there's another piece to this, which is on the back end of it, which is it's one thing to measure, but if we're not also finding a way to reward people when they're doing things right, I think you can just exhaust your staff. This would be true of boards too. So I hope that whatever we do to measure our performance, we should not fear failures because we should learn from them. And secondly, we should reward people for sincere effort, no matter what the outcomes are. Because if we can't hold on to the people who have not just institutional knowledge, but donor knowledge about the people who love the things we do, we will lose. We will lose revenue.
I think they call that trust capital.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, you kind of led into the next question. What do you recommend are possible ways to evaluate board members?
Yeah. Well, first we'd have to establish what their goals and benchmarks are. I don't know what your experience has been, but I don't run into that enough. I keep running into organizations where if there's a job description for the board members, it may not have been revisited in a long time. What is the onboarding process? Is there one? When is there a review? Not to say, are you doing their job or not, but to find out how successful they feel they're being. Is there a term limit? Not because we want to get rid of people, but because we want a constant infusion of people with blood. Is there a way to maintain relationships with people who have served on our board, whether it's because there was term limitation or because they had to rotate off, they had other things in their life? Is there a way to maintain that relationship? I've seen all of these things go wrong, but there's one that it may be more important than the rest, which is, have they established up front before people join the board exactly why they're being asked, exactly what they're being expected to do, and they're asked to make that investment before they join.
Jay, I'm a firm believer in a one-page board of directors expectations form.
Right. I agree.
Probably has 10 pieces, and you really ultimately talk about gifts of time, talent, and treasure.
Right.
And guess what? They sign it, so they can't say, we didn't know that this was expected of us. It's not legally binding, but when someone signs something, it's a whole different process of taking information.
Right. Maybe they can think about it more like one of those pacts that people make as kids.
Yeah.
We're in this together. It's not like, if you don't do this, you're in trouble. This is a chance for people to say, I'm in. And that's kind of a powerful thing.
What have you found works best in the recruitment of new and strong board members?
I'm not sure, honestly. I mean, this is a tough one, especially with an eye towards diversifying boards, which is a continual problem. Our boards are still pretty monochromatic, and that's an issue because our communities are not. I mean, most of ours. And my belief is that boards should be reflective of the communities that they serve.
Right.
And I have a thought on that too. It sounds like a departure, but there's been a debate that if you do have a board that's reflective of the community, that's truly diverse, and diversity in all of its forms. I'm not just talking about race, ethnicity, the standard old-fashioned stereotypes of what diversity means, but the real way of thinking about what does the community look like as a whole? Where do people come from? What socioeconomic status, points of view, the whole gambit, including race and ethnicity, and gender and age.
Right.
And in all those things, are we also going to invite people to give? And my belief is very strongly that just because someone comes from a different background from whatever mine is or yours is or whomever is, we should not make assumptions about their commitment or their ability. And so we should invite everybody and have an expectation, reasonable expectation, that a board member should make this board their primary philanthropic responsibility. And so I don't care where people are from, how much money they have, if they grew up in another country, and they come from a different faith, they earn a different kind of living, they worked a different kind of job. People can meet that challenge. And if they're not willing to meet that challenge, first of all, that's a problem. But I think what's a bigger telling thing is if we're not willing to ask them, because it shows our own bias and prejudice about what people are able and willing to do. And I think we should put aside all prejudice and assumption about people's ability and their commitment. Now, recruitment, where are you going to find people? The tradition,
and we all want the good ones, right?
We all want the good ones, and what does that what does that mean? Is the other thing does it in some places we want the people who have this particular skill set. Well, that sounds like a working board to me. That can be helpful in early stages. It's not necessarily very helpful when you want a board that thinks strategically. Okay, so you want a strategic board. You want people who give. Does that mean you just want the rich people who never show up? I don't think so. So where's the sweet spot? That's hard when you're essentially just doing recruitment based upon your current board, which then gives you a problem in those three areas. First of all, they're going to look like your board. You're going to lose that ability to truly address diversity. Secondly, you're going to have people who are probably roughly in the same age group, maybe even the same kinds of careers, which is a problem.
Yeah.
And then third, it's only in their own part of the Venn diagram. And what you ideally want is people with different kinds of experiences in life and different ways of viewing the world to overlap just a little bit so they can all work together. So, if we were all sailors, you wouldn't want just people who knew how to, I don't know, what's the equivalent, raise a sail. You'd need people who knew how to read the stars. You'd need a lot of different kind of skills, including a cook in the kitchen, or else everybody's going to starve to death. And so our boards should be like that. We better start looking that way. That means we're going to have to start doing an inventory from our database, the same way we would for donors, right? I'm a believer in data, so I believe in screenings as one method. We can do that. We can find connections between our people and those people. We can look for the donors who have been there with us for a long time that we've never invited to participate in a special committee or serve as an honorary chair or something to see if they're farm crop for the board. There are lots of ways that we can do that. We don't have to just rely on the closest friends, which keep us in this tiny little network. And we don't have to rely on strangers who we think are going to come in like Superman or Wonder Woman and save the day. It's something in between, that little bit of overlap, which is enough, those tender connections that we can draw them into us.
We're flipping back and forth from staff to board. Let's go back to staff. How many major gift prospects do you think a development officer can carry in their portfolio?
Yeah, I used to be one of these, it must be 100 to 150 people. And I was wrong. I think that David Lively is right. I think it depends on where you are, who you are, what the organization has, et cetera. But I think the sweet spot probably is in that 40 to 75. And the reason is not just because he convinced me, which he has, but also because I imagine what our time will allow us to do. So another way of thinking about this is, what are people spending their time doing? I would like to think that 50% of the time, at least, people are talking to people.
Yeah.
They're on the phone.
That can be by cell phone, that can be by video conference, but it also can be by visiting them at their home or their office.
All of the above. Absolutely right. It's a break for coffee. It's a text message that's meaningful, not SMS, campaigns. It's all the things you just mentioned and more. And all those touch points are about not just getting the money. The money comes from a result of the people having a meaningful relationship through us to the mission.
Yeah. And I'm going to work on that. I once heard a relationship is something that you have until something better comes along. And I like to say that our job in fundraising is developing friendships. Because I think the difference is if you have a friend of your nonprofit, you can say Jay gave us $5,000 this year, and we go to him and we ask him to give $10,000 next year. We can take a no, and that doesn't stop the association and the alignment of our priorities and values and needs.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I guess we all have to pick the words that we think best reflect the values and also what we're trying to communicate. And so I can understand why you'd pick that word. It makes sense to me. If a relationship sounds like I want a commitment, but it's on my terms, that can be pretty destructive too. The idea that you're in a evolving friendship over time with someone on their terms sounds very healthy to me.
Right. Hey, do you have a crystal ball?
No, I don't even have an 8-ball.
I mean, what's that? You have an 8-ball?
I don't even have an 8-ball.
Okay. What is in the J. Frost crystal ball projecting what 2023 is going to look like?
I'm actually a continual optimist, but I'm going to sound a little bit pessimistic for a minute. I think that we have that the market has to correct at some point, and that will affect major gifts because the gifts are a lagging indicator of the marketplace. And the reality is, if somebody has a national database, 1 out of 100 people is a pentamillionaire, and the bulk of that money is driven from the stock market, whether they're inside or not.
Right.
So that's just an economic fact of most of our constituencies. It's not real estate, although that's important, but that's more of an indicator because people have to live in a house. So unless they have a lot of homes, and those are often then clusters, is like a real estate investment trust, which is then a business. Unless they've got that, they're not going to give away their home unless they're passing away and they want to pass the house to the institution. They want to receive it. So stock is huge. And when the stock market goes up or down, we have to think about the meaning of that. It doesn't mean that they've lost their money because insiders, at least, outperform the market by 11% a year. So they sell, then the rest of us sell afterwards. That's why it hurts us more than it hurts them. But they are still humans putting on their pants one leg at a time. And it still hurts. So if their wealth goes from 40 million to 25 million, it still hurts.
Yeah.
And so the reason I'm saying all this is that I can imagine a scenario in which the market corrects. And when that does, more than going from 39 to 33, then it's going to be meaningful to our organizations because we have hyper-focused on a very small percentage of people who can do big things for us. And there are more and more organizations all the time looking for those few people. So if we're going to try and deal with the inevitability of market corrections, among other things, including inflation, and who knows what all is going to happen with us politically, it's been very volatile there, then we're going to have to be able to talk to a lot more people in a meaningful way. Because of what you said, Jim, if we're watching the general population say, you know what, these nonprofits, all they want is my money. It's one more solicitation in my email box. They don't really care about me. Then we're going to watch that 75% going to under 50% of the population giving. We're going to be in big trouble if we don't get this big money and we can't rely on these people. And there are more and more of our organizations looking for more and more money because the government won't support what we do, like food banks. So unless we address that middle right now in every way possible, we're going to be in big trouble. And that means mergers and so forth.
There's some real meat there. Could you repeat that last line?
Oh, then unless we address the people in the middle, we're going to be in big trouble?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I could say that all day because I think it's true. So can I give a personal example?
Yeah.
All right. So there's an organization that I don't want to name the organization. That's not fair to them, but they do really extraordinary work, and it works with injustice in the justice system. I had read this book and seen a movie, and I was just floored by how compelling it was and the work they were doing to address this problem. And so I started giving them $100 a month. Now, that's not a lot of money, I know, but for me, it's meaningful. And I think more importantly, I am willing to guess that I'm probably in the top 5% of donors. Just because, you figure if somebody starts to give, they're giving you $100 a month, they're probably in that neighborhood.
Oh, we love monthly givers.
We love monthly givers. So for all those reasons, you figure, $1,200 suddenly, they're giving me money consistently and I don't know who they are. They'd want to know more. So what happens? I'm getting email saying, dear friend.
Yeah.
I'm at one point when my credit card lapses, because I needed to change it because, one of these things with your credit card number gets compromised or something. So I changed the card number, and then they're not talking to me about that. They're not even noticing. At one point I called them up because I saw an error in an email, and I call his, fundraising guy, and just to let them know, and I left them a message, and I never heard back.
Are you still giving them $100 a month?
I stopped after that, and in part
They
I
lost
stopped.
you.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, I can, again, I'm using both sides of my brain. So the donor part of my brain was, well, these people aren't really showing me much love, but I can deal with that, but I don't like it. But then the other part of my brain was kind of at a certain point testing them.
Yeah.
And saying, well, let's see what they do this time. And that made me mad as somebody in our profession, because what I thought was, I am not special. I'm not. So if I'm not special, then that means they're treating other people this shabbily. And that makes me mad, not because of the way they're treating me, and not even because of the way they're treating the donors, but because the way they're treating the beneficiaries, because some guy is not going to get out of jail because somebody in their office couldn't change something from dear friend to dear Jay. That makes me mad. It's not about me. It's about the failure. And I think we can do better. And I think a lot of that rests on whether or not we're going to start building these meaningful relationships with people. And if we're going to stop worrying, like all the things we've been talking about, stop making it about us. I'm worried that people are going to say no. Stop thinking about how much it costs. No, just talk to fewer people in more meaningful ways. Stop thinking about, I need to cover the cost of this special outing. No, forget it. This is about one thing and one thing only. Here's the mission. Here are the people who can help us do it. If we are serious about making that mission work, then we're going to go to these people. We're going to find out who they are. We're going to find out what their needs are. We're going to invite them to this party, just like it's that wedding. And we're going to let them be our partners in making this thing happen. If we're not willing to do that as organizations or staff or board members, we should get out of the way and let somebody else do it. Because the work we're doing is too important to waste time on anything else.
I'm reminded what the late Maya Angelou said. People won't remember what they told you. They won't even remember what you did.
Right.
They will never forget how you made them
Made
feel.
them feel.
Our job in nonprofits is to make our donors feel like the most important people in the world.
Right, which doesn't mean that we in any way compromise our mission. It's not about that. And that's where some people, I think, have conflated these ideas, where they'll suggest that, if we do that, if we pay too much attention to the donor, we compromise our values. I think that that's wrong. I think we actually build better relationships with donors when we stand strong in what we believe in.
I agree.
And then we find people who believe in the same things.
Hey, fist bump thing on that. Hey, we learned, Jay, that contributions come from basically three different groups.
Yeah.
Individuals, corporations, and foundations. Can you take a moment and to talk about fundraising strategies for each of those three major sources: individuals, corporations, and foundations?
Yeah, I'm going to be weaker on the last two, even though I started as a grant maker, but that was a long time ago. But on the individuals, that's where I focus my time. And that's where the most of the money is, right? And
70%, right?
Yeah. Plus, there are individuals in these other places too. It's just a matter of what authority do they have over the pot of money. So if it's a corporation, then they have to answer to the shareholders ultimately, or to the owners of the company if it's private, but it's still a person you're talking to. And if it's a foundation, whether it's a family foundation, which isn't really a meaningful term, but it's kind of descriptive, or whether it's the Rockefeller Foundation. There are members of the family involved, but it's really a infrastructure professional grant makers. That in any of those cases, you're still talking to people. And with individuals, it's all just people. So I think that ultimately the strategy should be about, again, this sounds so simplistic, but it really is this simple, I think, is finding out who they are, where they come from, and what matters to them. And of course, you use qualifiers. I mean, do they have the money or not? And every foundation and every corporation does. So let's just put that aside for a second. Some have more, some have less, but none of them are going to give you very much. It's the individuals who can do whatever they want, whenever they want, which is why it's so great. But the thing is that they don't have to do anything, which is what makes it so hard. So if you really want them to think about doing something, then you're going to have to know, do they care or not in the first place? And do they have the resources not to do it? And so I think the thing we need to do today is the same thing we needed to do a year ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, which is we better do our research. And organizations spend a little too little money on this. And then when they do it, they tend to do it sporadically. They should make the investment on a consistent basis. If we were in any other line of work, doesn't matter what it is, that research is essential and fundamental to building the business and sustaining it, and to growing it. And we'd better do research on our file, and we better do it consistently. Hospitals are a great example of this. So hospitals are under the pain all the time, under the gun of coming up with money to do something, right? So even if they have a good, let's say, infusion of capital for oncology, they may not have it for neonatal. Or it may be a community hospital that gets Medicare, but they don't have enough for some other thing that they need to do. So all of those things can be addressed in part, not fully, but in part, by simply knowing who has come through your door, knowing what resources they have, and knowing what they care about. I'm not talking about HIPAA violations here. I'm talking about basic screenings on names and addresses in a way that's permissible. Talk with your legal counsel, but that way at least we know something about the people. And then going out and talking to them, just like we would in a capital campaign, where you have meetings with people and you do what we would call discovery calls, but they otherwise called in real life conversations, where you talk to people about, like you're talking with me, like what do they care about, right? And so just find out who they are, like what motivates them, how they want to be remembered, and then we can hopefully get to a point where we can invite them to do the thing that lets them feel proud in front of their grandchildren.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, there used to be, I think, in total gift income, an 80-20 split, like in a lot of things, where 80% of the outputs come from 20% of the inputs. And it used to be that 80% of total gift income came from just 20% of the donors. And now we're seeing something more like a 90%, 10% split. What do you think that means for philanthropy?
Yeah, for capital campaigns, it's much steeper, right? So the bigger the goal, the tighter that ratio. So it might be 95.5 or 97.3.
Yeah.
So what do we do about that? I wonder, is this a chicken and egg question? Is the reason it's that way because of the economics of society? Maybe. But is it this way also because of what we do? And I don't know the answer to that. So if we are focused, hyper-focused on just the few at the top, it's been very successful for us. You and I could come up with a campaign model for virtually any organization that has a history with a database of constituents of some breadth and a program, some kind of mission or vision that's going to take them over 5 years to do whatever the project is. But if they have not built those relationships and they couldn't find those people, it's tougher. But generally speaking, there's going to be a few people in there who can do those things if we build all those. The problem with that is inadvertently we often ignore the 90% or the 93%, the 97%, or we just talk to them in this kind of casual way. And so I don't know what the answer to this is, because I don't know how much we have caused this problem. And that's why I keep focusing on what are the ways we can address it as a solution. And one thing that that I know that many people are utilizing now to address this, and in fact, it's talked about in this. Okay, so this is a this is a book by a couple of friends, or actually 3 friends.
Oh yeah.
Could you say the title of it?
What do you think?
Yeah, this is The Generosity Crisis, and it's the subtitle, because all books need that, is The Case for Radical Connection to Solve Humanity's Greatest Challenges. And it's by Nathan Chappell, who's at Donor Search, but he runs this AI division So think of it as like the, I don't know what, the brain of fundraising in a way. It's using artificial intelligence and machine learning to try and figure out where the opportunities are among the people who are performing less. And they're probably performing less not because of their fault, but because of our fault. Brian Crimmins, who's at Changing Our World, and then Michael Ashley, who's this brilliant wunderkind of a young guy who writes a billion books on everything and writes for Forbes. Anyway, those guys are talking about this, in part evangelism, which you can tell I respond to, but also in part because they're trying to address this central problem. Just because what we're doing is working doesn't mean it will continue to work. So how are we going to address this problem? It could be by using tools like machine learning to identify pockets of opportunity based upon people who have been underserved, not who are underperforming, but who have been underserved by us.
Very good. Hey, here's another, by the way, Michael, do we have anybody who has a question?
We actually just got one in the chat space. Okay. If you want me to go ahead and read it.
Oh, sure.
Please do.
So this is from Micah and Micah Arellano, I'm not sure. But the question is, some executive directors, as they start operating nonprofits, they also inherited board members that have served several years, limiting the growth of the organization. What is the best practice or approach to ask current board members to step down?
It's again so individualized, right, Jim? I mean, it's hard to say.
Jay and I have a deal. If the question's real easy, I'm going to handle it. If it's more challenging, he's going to handle it. Jay?
Thanks a lot. No, I mean, I'm running into this with a couple of organizations right now. It's a very common problem. I guess.
I'm going to say, I get back every year, members of the board should be challenged to sign a one-page commitment form of time, talent, and treasure. And so you're not only getting new board members to commit to it, but, those who are re-upping for a second, third, or even longer term, they all should sign something. It's not legally binding, but rule of thumb is when they sign something, 90%, it's like a pledge. 90% of the time it's going to be fulfilled.
Right. And I would add to that, Jim, that doesn't mean it's asking him to do the same thing as everybody else.
Right.
Because it could be that what you're hoping that it's an individualized agreement between you and the organization.
Significant.
Right, exactly. So it's not like every board member gives $1,000 or $10,000 or pick the amount. It's about that person's relationship with the organization, what they're going to do. And I think that's a very helpful thing to do and to review annually. But you've got people there who are already, so this is the problem, right? If those standards were not established, if they were recruited without that discussion, if, for example,
worse than told, don't worry about that.
Right, don't worry about that. And this happens a lot with people who are friends of founders and things of that nature. Yeah. So I don't know if that's the problem you're having, but it's very individualized. This sounds self-serving, but I really don't mean it that way. You don't have to do it with a consultant, although it's probably easy, which is to have somebody come in and do a board retreat where first, and I do this a lot, but you can do this without a consultant doing it. Or perhaps with some other person that you would trust as a consultant for this purpose. And that is to first you do a review of the board members by doing confidential interviews or by some kind of survey or both. Mm-hmm. And then you deliver all that content back to the board. So essentially what's happening is people have an ability to express themselves and be free to do so, and then have all that anonymized and delivered to the entirety of the board. So everybody hears the same message. And hopefully that message is things like, yes, this is a strong commitment for me. Am I ready to give more of my time, talent, and treasure next year? Here's some of the people I imagine serving with us. These are the reasons why. This is our strength. This is our weakness. So instead of somebody from the outside just coming in saying, "This is what I think," from the oracle, it's an analysis that's been informed by good questions, and it might take a little bit of pressure off the staff and, for that matter, the chair of the board, because it is that self-reflection.
I think the problem with underperforming board members, not only are they not personally contributing, but they set a terrible example for other members, and particularly new members of the board. if Jay or Jim never show up at board meetings,
yes,
that's setting a terrible statement to new board members.
That's right. That thing about attending meetings is a big part, because those people can be great, but if they're not showing up, it's a terrible message.
Yeah. Okay, Jay, how about if we're a little philosophical, okay?
Ready.
If I had a magic wand like this and I could send you back in time,
yeah,
what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Write more poetry and send more out, and not worry about whether or not it gets published, for one thing. But
I haven't heard anywhere that there's a poet inside you.
I published a few things. I ran into an issue when I was at the National Endowment for the Arts, where I was not going to be able to submit work to any magazine that might be a potential grantee. And I'm a rule follower. So I ended up not submitting to virtually any magazine in the United States. And then that unfortunately was a bad habit. So I still write, but I still don't really submit. But it's more seriously, I would say that this is another Jerry Panis thing, which is that, you are what you consistently do. And so one thing that I think I've done well is that I've been opportunistic in, I hope, a helpful way. So that's been good for me. I've raised my hand a lot. What I've not necessarily done well is then done that consistently.
Yeah.
So I would tell my 21-year-old self that once you make those commitments, you might want to stick with some of them for longer, if only in advisory capacity, because there's a value in that. And I've learned that lesson over time, and I do that better today. But I didn't do it very well when I began. On the other hand, one thing I would say, the big overarching one, Jim, is that I would hope that I would always be brave. I've been brave from time to time, but probably more by accident than by design. And as I get older, the one thing is that I hope that I will not be afraid to do anything, not because I don't care what people think, but precisely because I do care about the outcomes. So I hope that both, that's what I would say to my younger self, but hopefully that's what I'll say to my older self as well.
It sounds kind of poetic. And by the way, I believe your mentor, Gerald Panis, was referred to as the poet laureate of philanthropy.
I don't know, but I'm sure he would have liked that.
Yeah. And by the way, Michael, can you put the wrap-up slides, if it's okay? You have inspired Jim Eskin. You have inspired so many up-and-coming professionals. You've inspired board members, and all to do more in touching, improving, and saving more lives. So if anybody wants to contact you, you're all over social media, but that's your email address. And Frost on Fundraising has probably raised over the course of his career billions of dollars. So this is one of the wisest, sagest people I know. So Jay, thank you so much, not only for sharing an hour here. By the way, Michael, there's one other slide. That's my contact information. I think there's one other slide about January 12th, if you could put this on the screen. I am so grateful. I've done, I think, a big deal, 100 webinars. Mr. Frost has done 600, and I guess somewhere I'm going to be around 601. And I am really looking forward to participating in the Donor Search Philanthropy Mastermind series you host. And we'll be putting out invitations to everybody in this audience and other audiences. It's going to be on Thursday, January 12th, starting, I always do things Central Time. I think starting around 2:30 Central Time, 3:30 Eastern Time. So I get to see you soon. Let me, Jay, wish you all the best for the holidays. And
thank you, Jim. You too.
Prosperous and healthy new year. But again, thank you for sharing an hour with our learning community. And thank you for the way you have so richly shared your time and knowledge and insights with the rest of us in the fundraising profession. Thank you so much for the leadership you provide, everyone. And to our audience, thank you again for your jobs and your nonprofits. You do make a difference. And I'd like to say that you touch, improve, and save more lives. And you have our extreme gratitude. And good night. And we'll see you on January 12th.